Welcome to Love School. This is where I share our universal lessons in love through the ancient art of storytelling. I'm your host, Tanishka. You might know me as the Moon Woman, but if you love being read a story, get yourself nice and comfy. And if you enjoy the podcast, click the subscribe button so you receive a notification when I release the next episode. Hi, welcome to episode 3. Today we're going to explore the themes of self-love and also what it takes to love ourselves. Okay, it's a process. It's not something that we immediately go, oh, I love myself. There's always a journey to get there. And the story by Hans Christian Andersen, first published in 1844, The Ugly Duckling, is a story that I've adapted for today to share that lesson. So at the end of the story, I will deconstruct it from the perspective of the mystic feminine. So settle down and get comfy. I hope you enjoy the story. Once, in the centre of a thick wood, sat a duck on her nest, waiting for her eggs to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for her little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. Finally, one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and chirped. Then she noticed the largest egg hadn't hatched. Just then an old duck waddled past and asked how she was going. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break. But just look at all the others. Aren't they the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw?" "Let me see that egg that will not break," said the old duck. "I have no doubt that's a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch one once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked, I clucked, but all to no purpose. I couldn't get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yep, that's a turkey's egg. Take my advice, leave it where it is, and teach the other children to swim." "I think I'll sit on it a little while longer," said the duck. "As I've sat so long already, a few days will be nothing." "Please yourself," said the old duck, and she waddled away. At last, the large egg cracked, and a young one emerged who did not look at all like the others. He was grey, large, and odd. "Maybe it is a turkey," she thought. "Well, we'll soon find out when we go in the water. It must go in if I have to push it in myself." The next day, the young mother duck took her young brood down to the water, and they all jumped in with a splash, including the ugly duckling. "Well, it's not a turkey after all," thought the young mother. He is my child, and not so ugly after all." When they waddled into the farmyard, someone pointed and jeered at the odd-looking duckling and called him queer and said, "We don't want him here. He's not like the rest of us." Hearing that, another duck flew over and bit the young one in the neck, startling him. "Leave him alone," said the mother. "He is not doing you any harm." "Yeah, but he's so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck. "He's not one of us, so he must leave." "That's impossible," replied the mother. "He would die. And besides, he has a lovely temperament." "And he swims better than all the others." She stroked his neck and smoothed his feathers, which were ruffled. After that, whenever he didn't have his mother around to protect him, the ugly duckling was bullied by the other ducks. He wished he could go back into his shell. So he did, energetically. He retreated inside himself in the hope he would go unnoticed, for fear of being attacked. But this didn't work. Just being himself seemed to evoke aggression in others. Perhaps they're afraid of me because I'm different, he thought. But they'll never know me because their minds are made up. Finally, after a particularly bad day, where his sister remarked, "I wish the cat would get you," and his mother said she wished he'd never been born, he ran away. The next morning, he encountered some wild ducks, ducks whose world was not limited to the confines of the barnyard, but those who soared high in the air and travelled across great distances, seeing the world from a great height. They were curious to know why such a young bird should be travelling all alone. Just then, two shots rang out, and two of the wild ducks fell from the sky, squawking as they fell. The rest fled in a panic, leaving the young duck alone. It would be very sad if I were to relate all the misery that this poor little duck endured that long winter. But when it passed, he found himself one morning sitting in the bulrushes with the warm sun shining on his feathers. He heard the lark singing, announcing the return of the light of springtime. Now, he had grown through his challenges over the long winter. Now his wings were strong. When he flapped them against his sides, he rose high into the air. Like the wild ducks, he could catch the warm thermal currents and soar over rooftops and gardens. That day, he flew over a grove of apple trees in full blossom, growing beside a stream lined with wildflowers. Everything looked so beautiful in the freshness of the early spring. And there in a thicket close by that stream came the most beautiful birds he'd ever seen. Noble, majestic, royal. They were beautiful white swans. They rustled their feathers and then swam lightly, rippling the smooth, glass-like water. One of the birds noticed this solo bird, and they called to him to join them. He was surprised. Why were they welcoming, so unusually friendly? So he asked them, "Why are you so friendly?" And one of them replied, "Because you're one of our kind. We recognized you instantly." Was this some sort of cruel joke, thought the young duck. He started to cower and retreat, waiting for the retaliation. "Why are you afraid?" asked the kind swan, who sensed his fear. "Because this is foreign. I have not known love except from my mother, and I was afraid you were toying with me for your entertainment." Kind swan invited the young duck to look at himself in his reflection in the water. "You and me, we're the same. I am you, you are me. I love you as I love myself. Those who have not looked into their own reflection aren't capable of love. So the first theme that I noticed in reading this story today was the older duck who rejected him when he was still in the egg because he was different. This is a miserly mother, someone who has not yet learnt how to love someone else's child as if they were your own. There's nothing quite like having a child to open your heart. But not all parents are able to extend their generosity to those born outside of their nest. Some do this beautifully as foster carers. In the ancient world, every woman over the age of 30 had the title of mother, and every postmenopausal woman had the title of grandmother, on the understanding they're all our children, and we're all responsible that they are nourished, protected, cared for, and loved. It's only been in the age of empires, in the patriarchal times, that we saw our offspring as heirs who bore the title of our patrilineal lineage, who belonged to us as possessions, and us alone. As Cahill Brown said in The Prophet, your children are not your own. They come through us. They're sovereign, they belong to themselves. But we each have a duty of care to the young, those who can't yet do for themselves. So, not abandoning one who is so young and vulnerable they will die without the intervention of an elder is a great betrayal. This story also speaks to love as patience. We saw at the beginning the young duck mother, like many mothers in pregnancy, get over the process. I know for me, 2 weeks off giving birth, I gave my daughter an eviction notice. I was tired of reflux and swollen ankles, not being able to wear shoes. I'd had enough of the process. But here we see a loving young duck who says, you know what, I've waited this long. I can wait a bit longer to tend to this one, even though she suspected it wasn't her own. It also takes patience to find our footing, to find our tribe. And that's only possible if we're patient enough with the process of finding our true self. Given that we are distracted constantly in our modern world, we are encouraged to focus entirely on the outer world, on virtual realities, on make-believe, dramas, comedies, constant entertainment, everything to avoid ourselves, to sitting with ourselves, to being present with what we're feeling, what our observations are, what our knowings are. But this is what it takes to meet the self. And until we take that road less travelled, to quote Scott Peck, we evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves with others. We might aspire to be like the ideal model that's projected upon us as the perfect ideal and measure ourselves against how well we can emulate that. But it's only when we give up trying to fulfill that ambition of the mind and return to ourselves, which means setting ourselves apart. moving away from the madding crowd, being in nature, which is where the natural self is evoked. And it doesn't happen overnight. It happens through the passing of the seasons of our life. It happens with maturation. And this is why in the ancient world, milestones were such a big deal, and people deserved help midwifery with their milestones via rites of passage, something which is dear to my heart. We are here to fulfill our true destiny, but we can only do that if we take that sacred space, that sacred time to do that. And as I film this, we're coming up to a total lunar eclipse, a blood moon in Virgo, the sign of sacred space. It's only through choosing ourselves, choosing to show up, to spend quality time getting to know ourselves, to be curious enough about what makes us tick, what it is we deeply value and desire, that others will recognize us and choose us. If we reject ourselves by never taking that sacred space, that time on retreat, to know ourselves, to appreciate ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to invest in ourselves, then we will never know the true measure of who we are, like the lion who thought he was a sheep, which I suspect is the ancient parable that may have inspired Hans Christian Andersen to write this fairy tale. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to subscribe, share this with a friend or family member, and tune in next month when I'll share another story and some wisdom from the mystic feminine for a more loving world. Thanks.